Hi guys, welcome back to My Steps to Sobriety, my show on YouTube and as a podcast with me, your host, Stefan Neff. Today's another fantastic day for an interview, and it's going to be a very intriguing interview for me because my gut feeling is that my guest today has actually had quite a similar journey to me, yet we could probably be not more different if we tried, starting with our genders, starting with our backgrounds, with where we live, our experiences, yet, as you will see soon, we actually have fallen into the same traps. But we've learned similar lessons, and therefore I'm so excited to actually have Jill Reily on my show today. Jill, welcome to my show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you very much. Now, see, and the reason that I say we are so different is, Jill, you are a minister, you're a pastor, and I have not found Jesus Christ. I'm an agnostic, a humanist. I don't believe in someone else's imaginary friends, if I wanted to be derogatory. My wife has found Jesus Christ, so she is very much involved in her church and believes in it. And she's on a mission to get me sorted, get me ready for whatever is coming. But there's a bit of resistance there, let's say that to the least. But it is an interesting thing for me, therefore, to have a very religious person on my show. So I wanted to acknowledge that to start off with, because, for example, in my book, My Steps to Sobriety, I talk a lot about here we are, Steps to Sobriety. I talk a lot about God because it's part of the 12-step system. Yet, for me, it was a big problem in the addiction recovery, in the initial rehab, to God grant me the serenity when I don't believe in God. But I learned that God can mean a group of orderly drunks or a group of druggies. So in that setting, whilst I speak out towards more a secular kind of audience, I guess, it will be an amazing journey today with you, Jill. So, Jill, please tell me, when did your journey with Jesus Christ actually start? Was that something that came later on in your life, or were you as a little girl already all involved in that?
Well, I was raised in the church literally when I was adopted the second time. When, excuse me, when I was adopted, my family was very instrumental in the church in the sense that my father was the head of the board of directors. My mother was the church secretary. So I was literally playing in the nursery when I was a little girl. So I was raised in the church environment. I don't remember a time when we weren't in the church every time the doors were open. And so I was always at church. But I think my relationship with Jesus Christ really began when I became kind of an age of reasoning, 7 or 8. I was baptized when I was 8 years old, and then just fell in love with the potential of what the church could be at its best. And so dedicated my life to, as a teenager, as a very young teenager, I felt like I was called to serve in the church and to be a part of this amazing vehicle of communication and relationship.
That's beautifully said, isn't it? What the church could do at its best. Because obviously, for someone like me who is not necessarily involved in church, we hear in the news a lot of negative things about churches.
Absolutely.
And quite rightly so, because it has been a vehicle for very bad things to happen in far too many circumstances. But equally, there is this potential that so much good can come out of a group of people coming together with the desire to change the world to be a better place.
Absolutely.
And that is the wonderful thing. So this is basically whatever you make out of it, and under the leadership of hopefully someone who's enthusiastic and who can instill that willingness to take action to change the world. That is a good
Right. I
pastor.
think there's there's no limit to what a group of people who are passionate about a common goal can accomplish.
Isn't it? Take Rotary. Rotary has made it a mission to get rid of polio, and they have worked really hard around the world to, and apart from really some war-torn countries, they are on a mission to stamp out this disease. So that's one group of people who is not church affiliated and anything. So that is one example. There are many other examples out there, and certainly, in all fairness, give kudos where it is to the church that my wife belongs to. There are some amazing people there, and they are there because of the goodness of their heart. They're out there helping others, and so that's an absolute beautiful thing. So now I'll take that, and I never heard it being said like that. The way you've chosen your words, that was lovely. So everything is honky dory. Here you are, a young girl. You're living the life of Jesus Christ. You become a minister at age 18.
Yes.
So there you go. Well, first of all, I must say, when you're 18, you don't know you're back from your front. And here you go out there preaching the gospel. So hang on, how does that work? Are people not looking up and say, yeah, right, girl, grow up, and then come back in 20 years and then we're talking?
I don't know. I often thought, why would people listen to me? I mean, I started out working with adolescents and children, and so that felt a little bit more acceptable, being so young. But I was working with college students who were older than I was, and I was working with children who were way younger. So all ages. But at age 19, I became a part of a group that actually started a church. So me and 3 other men, we started a church at age 19. So I was just thinking, who is going to listen to me? But I believe that God just opened some doors and gave me confidence and authority and encouragement and some really great leadership behind me to help me grow and help me to learn in this process.
When you say help you to grow, typically you're focusing though on creating a church, you're creating a system, you're finding your place within that system. Did your journey equally include some growth within you, the soul searching, your maybe how you deal with negative emotions, how you deal with imposter syndrome, etc.? I mean, was that a time and was that a place where that came in, or were you more focused on creating and building up a church?
Well, I think there's several layers to that question. There's several answers. The first thing is dealing with being an imposter. I dealt with that when I was, say, leading a Bible study for a bunch of teenagers at the high school and feeling like, who am I to say anything or teach anything to anybody? But as I got older, and as I, even at 19, 20, 23, as I was doing this work, I had this very distinct feeling that I was called to it, that I was therefore given permission and backing and authority to speak into people's spiritual lives, which is a very daunting thing when you're dealing with people's spirits and their souls. You can't take that lightly. But at the same token, I was coming out of a very abusive upbringing, a very traumatic upbringing. And I was dealing with PTSD. I was dealing with a lot of mental health issues that I didn't know that I was dealing with at the time. And so layered on top of this, probably overactive drive to succeed and to serve and to be the best, layered on top of that and underneath of it was all of this trauma. So sandwiched in my success was definitely the traumatic that I was handling.
And isn't it such a powerful driver? Because when you're finally going out there and experiencing the freedom, when you come out of this kind of maybe toxic, maybe hard environment, where you suddenly get the freedom and people actually listen to you and people actually think, wow, she is doing some great things there. That's
Right.
intoxicating. This must have been such a
Absolutely. That's
boost
the
for
word that
you.
I was just kept thinking of, was it's intoxicating.
And that is a driver, isn't it? I remember that to actually, yeah, a similar experience to feel like nothing, to feel like a nobody, to not fit in, and then suddenly to be someone. It's you want to do it again and again and again. Now that has a good side because people like us create things and build things and
Right.
are driven. And in my case, I decided I needed to do a publication every 6 months. So I was doing some research project in addition to my teaching, to being taught as a junior. I was doing extra work here and there and everywhere, and it was basically keeping myself busy, busy, busy. Now that had an advantage for my career, of course. It also had the advantage that I didn't have to think about my trauma, that I didn't have to think
Mm-hmm.
about my own negative emotions. So I became the absolute workaholic and achieverholic, and therefore allowing myself not having to think, not having to,
Yes.
not having to feel, I should say.
Well, people used to ask me all the time, Jill, what are you running away from? What are
Ha,
you working so hard to get away
ha,
from? And it used to very much offend me because I was
ha,
like, I am just driven to excel. I'm driven to
ha.
do the best. I've been supposed to do this job, so I'm going to do it the best that I can.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't until the bottom dropped out 6 years ago that I really had to take a hard look at that. And, they say in recovery, it works until it doesn't. And it worked until all of a sudden it didn't.
Uh-huh. Interesting. Interesting. Uh, how were you dealing with the problems of others, whilst at the same time trying to run away, to keep going with that picture, whilst running away from your own things? Were you good in picking up abuse, for example, in others?
Mm-hmm. Well, I was good and very sensitive to some of those things. But in truth, I worked with white suburban churches most of the time. And so the problems in suburbia are often hidden and not at the surface and not exposed to the world because there's a standard to keep up, right? And so I often suspected things or would deal with things, but it didn't affect me deeply in the same sense that it did later on. I also worked as a business consultant, as a church consultant. And so as a consultant, you drop in and you leave. You don't have to stay and sit in other people's stuff and other people's problems. But as I started my own church, I started a church in Seattle and started a church here locally, and then eventually started a church that I led independently. And when I started that, we started with a disenfranchised, disadvantaged audience. And so their problems were more at the surface, more exposed, more willing to be talked about. It was a multi-ethnic congregation. And so we had everybody from the very, very least of these, the very poor, to people who were very privileged. And so our community community then was one where people would talk about abuse and trauma and addiction and human sexuality and all of those things. So it was a very honest environment, but it was also very traumatic as a leader of the group to be listening to and absorbing all of this stuff. And we had several suicide attempts during that time. We had suicide success. A gal shot herself in the chest. We had addiction, we had spousal abuse, all of these different things. And whether I wanted to or not, I was really absorbing that.
Isn't it? That's what we are so good at. When I became a pain physician, I became an anesthetist first, and then specialized in chronic pain management. And I was very good at it because I felt so much for the patient. And I knew that I could do so many things for the patients. So it was a beautiful journey, but a journey where I let transference occur without realizing it. I took on so many of the problems of my patients that it destroyed me. And that was the brutal thing. So I could smell an addiction a mile away. I could see the depression whilst the patient was just opening the door to come into my consult room. I could see exactly as if I had radar vision. I could see what was going on. Could you see it in yourself? I didn't. I could not see myself suffering exactly the same things. What did you feel when you looked at someone and he told you their story? What were the emotions they were going through?
Well, for one, I was very cut off from my emotions and from my capacity to feel, which sounds counterintuitive to being a minister and being cut off from your emotions. But I had taught myself to separate those things. But I did feel like my perception and my ability to see and spot and understand people's hardships was very keen. And I think it's interesting that I was drawn to a community that was so wounded, drawn to a group of people that were so wounded when I myself was equally, if not more significantly wounded in my background and in my life.
And you nailed it there. That's exactly it. We become the knight in shining armor for someone else because we could never, or we did never have that experience in our own life, and we are feeling powerless. Or at least at that time, I felt powerless about the things that were happening in my own life, the emotions that were washing over me. These were brutal times. A lot of shit happened. A lot of trauma happened around that time whilst I was a pain physician, as well in my private life, and it was awful. So therefore, I became so fixated on fixing other people, helping other people, and maybe that was my rescue for a little bit, but also my excuse not having to face the trauma and my own feelings. So there I was working really, really hard, focusing on others. And when I then couldn't focus anymore because I was just working 16 hours straight, I then went straight for the bottle because then I again didn't have to focus on my own emotions.
Well, and people are funny because people will say to you, "You need to slow down and don't work so hard and quit pushing yourself." At the same time as they'll say, "I want more of you. I want you to help me more." Right? So it's kind of a push pull.
I like it. I like it. So I mean, did you have that realization then? Did you actually sense what was going on, or were you trapped and lost in your own little hamster wheel, doing more and more for others without realizing what was happening to you?
I was absolutely lost as a young mother. We had 4 kids in 5 years in our 20s, and so I was, chasing a career and finishing, several levels of education and raising a young family, and everything was at the behest of others. So I was doing everything for others without realizing my own neglect.
And we are proud about it. Was in your environment where you brought up that hard work is the only way forward, that you have to work in order to get somewhere, that it's expected from you? I certainly was. These were my principles.
Absolutely. Well, I was raised in a single parent household. My parents divorced when I was very young. And so I was raised with a single mother who had an 8th grade education and cleaned buildings for a living, and came from nothing and came from no money, and worked extraordinarily hard and refused to accept help from anybody, and was just dogmatic about the work ethic. Now, there are good parts to that, right? To the work ethic, as long as you're not cut off from your reasons why and your emotions about it.
Wisely said, isn't it? But yeah, the wisdom comes, unfortunately, many, many years too late. Or not too late. All the wisdom comes at the time when the time is right. Okay, so
Right. Well, I think the thing is that I didn't realize that the amount of work that I was doing was to the detriment of myself. I didn't realize that I was actually running myself into the ground, thinking that I was doing good for everybody else.
that's the hard truth. I couldn't see it. Maybe I did see it, but I didn't want to see it, if that makes sense.
Right.
I think I was happy. No, wrong. Happy is so not the right word. I was miserable, but I was at least content in my misery. And I was, bathing like in it like a pig in mud. And it is just,
Well, like I said earlier, it's funny because people will say, hey, slow down, take a deep breath. But at the same time, they will ask you for more and give you accolades for producing. So the messages are very, very mixed when it comes to success and drive and achievement, right?
Oh, so true. It's madness, absolute madness. No, it is. But what can you do? I mean, what can you do? Ultimately, life is such a challenge to us, and we don't see it when we're this young. When we are trying to make it all happen, we are trying to. You were a fighter. You were a survivor. You were a woman who was going out there, a go-getter. Look at her.
Yes.
She has got 4 children and going just all out, being a minister, being this, that. You get accolades, and that is sort of the quick fix, good junk food that makes you feel
Right.
so good for a very short period of time. And then comes the sugar slump.
Right.
And
Right.
you're searching
And
for the next fix.
that for me didn't happen until my mid 40s, right?
Interesting.
I'm almost 50 now, and it didn't happen until my early mid 40s that slump, that sugar slump actually happened.
Interesting. What were there little slumps? Were there how did you keep going? There must, I mean, in what 20 years of being a minister, there would have been times when you burnt out. I mean, I had so
Right.
many burnouts, and I look back, it's no longer funny. How were you?
Well, I think there were several many slumps that happened, but it was just this sense of pull yourself up by your bootstraps and
Yeah.
power through. You know, I had good power to do that. But one of the major things that happened was we had a daughter that at age 2 was diagnosed with cancer. And so we had to deal with some very traumatic years with her. Thank God she's now 22 and doing well, but it was very, very hard. But she, at the end of her treatment, I took a nosedive emotionally and discovered that I was dealing with some depression. Now, I'd always thought, you know, I'm just pulling myself through. I'm so busy. I'm tired because I'm busy. I'm overworked. And so that's why I don't feel good. But it was the first time that I'd really acknowledged that I was dealing with some significant depression. And so, but again, it wasn't until my marriage was in trouble, the church was costing me a lot to maintain emotionally. I had 4 teenagers at home. It wasn't until all the chaos kind of reached its pinnacle and that I just absolutely collapsed under the weight.
Okay. Wow. You sound so familiar to me. God, it makes me actually, yeah, no, it is exactly that. Yet you came from a complete different belief system. Here was Jesus Christ, who was in your life and who was supposed to give you solace, who was supposed to be there for you and guide you. And so you could say, what the hell? Your imaginary friend didn't really do very well there, didn't it? Okay, or
Well,
let's rephrase that. What lessons did he want you to learn, and why did it take you so long? So let's rephrase it this way.
I'm a slow learner, Stefan.
Touche. So, I mean, did you ask that question? Did you doubt Jesus at any time during that journey?
No, I had this very strong sense from the time that I was a child that God was real and that God was for me. And so even during the times when, for instance, we went through a custody battle between the state had taken custody of me. I was in foster care, and my mother, who was abusing me, had made a threat on my life. And people from the church stood up in the courtroom and testified against me, a child, to say that my mother would never abuse me. So even in the midst of that, I had this very strong sense that people are flawed and people can be bad, but God can be good and the church can be good in spite of the people that are fatally flawed. And as a young person, I always felt that way. So I never doubted God. I never doubted the presence of God. I was one who could feel the presence of God very viscerally in my life, very physically. And it wasn't until I crashed that I really doubted God's operation in my life. It took me 40 some years to get there and to begin that process of deep questioning and absolute doubt and deconstructing my faith.
It's interesting that you deconstruct your faith, yet what came first? Your personal healing? Were you angry with God? Were you angry with Jesus, or were you frustrated? Why did you deconstruct your faith rather than focus maybe on yourself, on how much you maybe contributed to things, how your responses to things that happened to you were potentially more up to you than you wanted to take into account earlier?
Yeah. You know, I don't know the answer to that except to say that I never felt, I mean, I ended up in a psych and trauma facility, and I felt like everything was dark. The lights went out. There was no faith. There was no God. There was no rightness to the world, because everything stopped. I didn't know if I had a family. I didn't know if I had a job.
Exactly.
I didn't know if I had character or substance or purpose or anything when I'm sitting in this place trying to figure out how to function, how to even operate, because I was so destroyed that I didn't even know my own purpose or reason for being.
What led to the admission?
Well, to that mission, or to figure
To
out
the to the
myself,
no,
or
no, to the admission to the hospital. How did you actually
to the
physically end?
admission.
How did you end up in the hospital?
Well, my marriage was in trouble, and so we had been in some therapy for our marriage, and the denomination that I worked for is very, very gracious and had been paying for that and had been helping us through that. And at some point in that process, it became apparent that we were going down a very wrong path, and the therapist had suggested that we separate. And so that created a big emotional crisis for me. And that emotional crisis led to the denomination, the church structure, taking over the church and saying, we're going to take care of you and help you figure this out.
Wow.
And they actually sent me to this psych and trauma facility for a workshop on childhood trauma. And they said, it's not that we feel like you're the cause of all the problems in your marriage. It's just that we feel like you could benefit from some understanding of how the trauma in your life and the trauma in the church congregation is compounding itself. So they were very, very wise and astute in that, and sent me to this workshop on childhood trauma.
Wow.
On the third day, I had a major dissociative episode and had lost all sense of time, place, reality, everything. And they said, you really need to be admitted to the hospital. And I said, you really need to get a life, because there is no way. I've got 4 kids at home. I've got a job. I've got a husband. I've got to go. And they said, no, you really need to. So they called the denomination then, and I knew it was tens of thousands of dollars, right, to be in any kind of recovery, facility. And they said, we're going to call the church group that sent you. And they called, and the denomination said, whatever she needs, we'll pay for it. And so I ended up being admitted then to the hospital. And then because I have a dissociative disorder, it took them a very long time to kind of diagnose what was going on with me, because there were so many parts of myself that were disenfranchised, and they were trying to figure it all out. And so it took 3 months of me being there. It was a 6-week program, and I ended up being there for 3 months, and while they diagnosed my mental illness.
But that's exactly what happens in children who come from alcoholic families or children who are abused, where there's trauma in early life. They dissociate. Right. That is sort of the classic response for their survival. They get raped, and yet their mind is somewhere else. It is such a normal thing, yet because it actually worked for you so well when you were a young child, it becomes the subconscious go-to. And therefore, that's what you said. You had it all so nice, compartmentalized. There was my trauma. Let's just pack that over there. Forget that it even is there. And now suddenly to bring that out and deal with it is a huge, huge challenge.
Right. And, it's interesting that you phrase it that way, is because in my diagnoses, when they, through all the testing and the assessments and everything, they said one of the ways I deal with my trauma is called traumatic organization, which means that a trauma happens. It's like a book, you put it on the shelf. It's like another book, you put it on the shelf. And they said, Jill, your shelf broke and you've got a mess and you got to deal with it.
I love it. Oh, what a beautiful picture.
That's how they described it to me. So yes, that's how I organized my trauma, set everything up on the shelf until it broke and became too much.
When you're in that scenario, when suddenly this realization hits you, it is very daunting. Can you remember that? Or was that such a traumatic time in its own right when you were in rehab or in this hospital that you only have fleeting memories of it? What can you remember from it?
It's it's kind of spotty, kind of vague-ish in the very beginning because
Exactly.
I was so dissociated. I was so just dis discombobulated. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't even know why I was there. I mean, I told them after about 3 or 4 days, I said, I'm leaving. I don't know why I'm here. And they said, no, really, you shouldn't do that. And it wasn't until I got actual diagnosis of what was going on with me with my complex PTSD and depressive disorder and anxiety disorder and a dissociative disorder. And I began to absorb some of that and to learn not only how it happened, but to learn what it was. I didn't have any definitions for some of those things. I couldn't have told you, anything about, major depressive disorders or, crazy anxiety disorders. I could have told you a little bit, but certainly not to the extent that the education that they gave me.
See, it's interesting now that you say it like that, because for me it's also plain obvious, so blatantly obviously see, because I had the training. I know exactly what the diagnostic criteria for a depression are, or for PTSD, etc. And seemingly I've learned through books, either in my profession or through those books that I actually read for pleasure, memoirs of soldiers, etc. So I had an understanding
Right.
of all that, but I couldn't diagnose it in myself. In fact, the PTSD only came out literally, the diagnosis became clear to me 2-3 years ago, when someone else I knew was going through a really bad period of his PTSD as a former sort of Air Force Special Forces kind of dude. And he actually sought help, and one day he said, look, it's going to be fine, it's going to be all right from here. And I thought, oh shit, is he thinking about doing something? And he said, no, I got the right help, you will see, I'm going to be fine in a week. And I looked at him, and in my mind I went through, yeah, right, you don't sleep, you're hypervigilant. And I went through all the diagnostic criteria. And only then, at what was it, 52, something like that, 53, suddenly I realized, hang on, I'm describing myself here. When I went through the diagnostic criteria, it took me this long. How long did I know what is PTSD? Oh, at least a quarter of a century? Come on. And here I am finally getting the breakthrough in my own life. So, and that is me as a doctor. I should know. Right. I should bloody know. Yet here you are. And sometimes I don't give myself I don't think that people who have never delved into mental health, for them it's so difficult to understand what is actually going on when we speak about depression. Unless you have lived it, unless you have felt it, unless you have seen the darkness and involving you and taking you in, and you can't see any light whatsoever, then you don't know what we're talking about.
Right. It's so, in a world where, I'm so depressed. Oh, I have anxiety. Oh, I had a panic attack.
Yeah.
When those words are becoming so normative that they're becoming descriptive of, I'm sad, I'm having a bad day, I'm anxious. We're using them as synonyms when they really aren't. And they're actually diagnostic criteria. And so for me, I felt like I had always done a really good job at advocating for those other people that had mental illness without understanding that the mental illness was also in me, and I was identifying in them what was in me. And so, but I didn't know the difference between depression and a major depressive disorder. I didn't know what dysthymia meant. I didn't know, and dissociation was completely unfamiliar to me. Now, of course, I live in a different world where it's trauma informed, as is the the favorite phrase right now, where I have educated myself and have been forced to educate myself a lot more about that. But I just didn't know, and it it took 4 decades.
And yet, here you are. We all have got this supercomputer in our head, but no one has ever given us the user manual. So we're here tapping on a few things. Oh, that feels good.
Right.
What's that? Oh, that's alcohol. Oh, good. That doesn't feel good. Oh shit, no, I don't like that. What's that? Honesty.
Right.
No, forget the honesty. No, I don't like that. So that is how it works, and it takes trauma. It takes us being so uncomfortable in our own skin that we simply have to make changes, that we simply have to learn about ourselves. And that's the reason that it takes a major breakdown, like yours, like mine, and like so many other people out there,
Right.
before they finally jump off the hamster wheel and actually stop and think and feel and start surrounding themselves with people who have been where they are now, and maybe learn how to change their life towards a new direction, how to jettison some of the core beliefs and some of the behaviors that maybe no longer suit you, maybe never suited you, but they were still serving a need. And here you
Right.
are after 20 years. So here you were 3 months really working hard on yourself. When you left, did you go straight back to ministering? Did you go straight back into the church?
No, no. I actually, I came home, and because in a rehab recovery environment, everything's so desensitized, or you're so sensitized to everything and become so uh, isolated in the sense of not having a lot of stimuli and all of that kind of stuff. They're trying to calm your brain the hell down. Um, I came home and I was almost an agoraphobic. I was at home. I only went out for doctor's appointments to go to therapy. I couldn't handle the stimulus of a bunch of people, let alone a bunch of work. I couldn't go back to work. We ended up closing the church down because there was no one that could come in and take over where I had been. And there was a building shift and a bunch of different things that happened that aided in that kind of demise. But I just went to therapy and went home. I sat on the couch and colored for like a year, and I couldn't care for my family, my husband, who we had not reconciled, but we're living in the same house. He was caring for the children almost exclusively. I just couldn't function, and it took a couple of years before really, my therapist says, the first couple of years I was working really hard, but you weren't even here. Like I wasn't even really that present in what was going on, because I just didn't, my brain wasn't there. It wasn't functioning.
Wow. Did you feel it? Did you feel that you were in this place, or it was simply not there? You were simply caught up somewhere.
No, I was absolutely bereft. I felt like I had lost a core piece of my identity. Remember, I had been somebody's pastor since I was 17 years old. And if I couldn't call myself pastor anymore, then what was I? And if I wasn't that, then what was I worth? Because I had attached worth to my occupation and to my title so much that it absolutely sidelined me, because I couldn't figure out then, if I'm not that, and if I just sit on the couch and go to yoga and that's all I do, then what can I possibly be worth to anybody else?
Beautiful. That was exactly what I went through. I was an empty shell after rehab. I, as part of my supervision by the medical council, they made me see reason that maybe pain medicine is not the field for me, that I'm too sensitive, that I'm taking on too much, and that really, for my own mental health, I should stop being a pain physician. Now, that was all I was for the 10 years
Right.
prior to that. So I had worked really, really hard to be the person who I was. I ran a huge pain clinic, and there I was. Suddenly that was all taken away from me. So it felt initially.
Right.
And I was empty. I had no clue who I was, and it was scary, very, very scary. At the
Very
same
scary.
token, nowadays I understand that this was the biggest opportunity in my life to reinvent myself, to explore who do I want to be when I grow up, and actually work on myself. It was like suddenly being given
Hmm.
an empty canvas, and you can draw whatever you want, you can paint whatever you want. I didn't see it then, and it was a bit weird because I started living again, but this time with training wheels on my little bike, and
Hmm.
it felt like a bit like that. And so
Absolutely.
what were the first things that you did? Who was the new person that sort of came budding out of the ground there, and who was the new you?
You know, one of the first things I did, ironically, was I was teaching a once a week, twice a week little college course, and just kind of getting involved with students on in small classes and small groups, basically, and that allowed me to still be up front and be a little bit detached, but involve myself in other people's world.
Mm.
So that's one of the first things that I did. That was, and then I could come home and just sleep for a couple of days. You know, I could ramp myself up for this, and then I could rest. But then, I started to talk about mental illness because I I didn't have a world where people freely talked about their mental illness until I went to rehab,
Mm.
and all of a sudden I was immersed in that kind of an environment, and where people talked about it as what it really is. Mental illness is a physical illness. And they began to talk about it with the
Mm.
same kind of graciousness and openness that we talk about physical illness.
Mm.
And so I decided that I was going to start writing. I'd always wanted to be a writer. I had done quite a bit of writing, and I decided that I was going to write. And so I did 100-day write and started a blog, and just decided about 5 days in, I decided, you know what? Screw it. I'm just going to let it all hang out and say, here's what I am. Here's what my mental illness is. Here's how I live my life. And it was like the emperor's new clothes. It's like I'm totally naked. Nobody can tell me otherwise. And so I started this blog. And then because of the blog, I started a podcast. And because of the podcast, I get to talk to you.
Oh, what a beautiful journey it is. But you literally, you found the new you in very small steps, and you tried a little bit there, and suddenly it's, and this coming out is such a beautiful thing, is it not? That
It
way.
is, but I'm not the same. I don't, I work very part time. I do jobs that I work from home, and I can do self care and take care of my time and and I realize I have the luxury of doing that because
Mm.
of the way our financial structure is and all of that. I do have the luxury of being able to self select my work and all of that. So I want to acknowledge that.
Mm.
But we have made some decisions that have helped me in being able to do that.
Wow, what a beautiful, beautiful turnaround that is. Uh, uh, how did your church support you once you came home out of the hospital? And did they know what was happening? Was there an understanding? And when I know not just, oh, okay, Jill has been in rehab or in a mental institution, but also what it really meant. Were there people who
Mhm.
had been in a similar boat who were able to guide you within the church?
Within the denomination, yes, I was well cared for, and the my supervisory structure was they were extraordinarily gracious, and they said, you know, Jill, you will literally have to walk away from this relationship before we do. We are here for you.
Wow.
And that's a pretty phenomenal thing for an administrative structure for a church, for a denomination. That's pretty rare.
Mm.
And but my own congregation, because the denomination had taken over, they were then being cared for by my supervisors. And so I was one step away from that. So they were told, give me space, give our family space. We need some time to heal. So basically, people just kind of backed off and were kind of afraid to engage me. But people didn't really know. They knew that I needed help. They knew that I was someplace, but they didn't know I was in a psych and trauma facility. They didn't know I was in a place called rehab. You know, they didn't know what was really going on, except that I was gone.
And which is, of course, a good thing and a bad thing, because on the one hand, the church wanted to protect you, wanted to protect your privacy, because good people and bad people gossip, and the last thing you need is actually someone talking behind your back. Oh, yeah, she is with Loopy. That kind of stuff. So there you are. There you are. She is. So they have protected you, and that's really nice. But the flip side is that people don't come to you and don't do anything. I was 3 weeks into rehab. One day, someone said, "You've got a visitor," and I said, "What?" And I knew my family on that weekend was not due to come down, and so and there was an anesthetic technician I was working with, and he made that 3-hour journey to come to me and just say, "Hi, brother, I know where you have been." He shared a little bit his journey with addiction, he told me things that probably not very few people know about him. And he just was there 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and I will never forget that, because he
That's a
actually went,
kindness.
yeah, he spent a day basically traveling to come to me to spend 20 minutes and say, "Brother, you're not alone. This is my story, and I've pulled through. If I can do it, you can do it," kind of a thing. And that was one of the first times that experienced that brotherhood, of brother and sisterhood, shall I say, of like-minded souls who have gone through trauma, have transformed, and are now having that bond, who are having that honesty, because we've all gone through this shit. We are no longer bullshitting. So you can't bullshit a bullshitter, and that is just such a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
So therefore,
there were some people in our congregation that literally said, "Jill, you have been with us through every effing thing, and we are going to be with you." And I wish I could remember the phrase, but they basically said, "We are going to be with you until the effing end, and we are here." So, I don't care what they say. They can't keep us away from you, because this is what love looks like. And you have taught us how to love. And this is how we're going to love.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. Oh, that's so lovely to hear that. That's so lovely, because then there is still stigma out there, a huge stigma. You could argue that many people are in churches because of their own trauma, because of their own problems. So maybe there's a bit of a self-selection going on, that those people in the church, in theory, could be more susceptible to the understanding that it's okay not to be okay. At the same token, certainly the church experiences I had in the past were just of some quite nasty people being in church. It was far more important for them to look around and say, "Oh, look what skirt she is wearing there. Oh, God. And did you hear they've got a new car? Oh God, you know, those kind of fucking gossip.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. That was
Yeah.
far more the church in Germany that I knew, that I was sort of, oh, and I thought, nah, thanks, I don't want to have anything to do with that. So therefore it really depends upon your own experiences. But I love to hear
Absolutely.
that actually there were people there who came out of the woodwork to support you, because you're very fragile. You're licking your wounds. You're still the wounded animal that is lying in the corner when you come out of rehab.
Right.
Whilst you think you have done, oh, I've done so much work, in reality, you're at the very start of your journey.
And that's so true. People ask me all the time. They said, when you got out, did you feel better?
Mm,
And I'm like, it's not a hospital. Like you go in with a broken leg and you come out with a leg that's set in a cast.
mm,
I just feel like I just have better questions.
yeah,
That's how I felt when I came out.
nice,
Is
nice,
not that I was better, but that I had better questions.
nice. That's lovely said, because yeah, that's it. It is, and they have just taught you how to ride a bike. You're still on your training wheels. Now
Absolutely.
you were for 3 months in a very isolated, beautiful bubble, where there were no mortgage issues. There was not neither here nor there. There were no teenagers who looked at you funny, or did not do anything.
Right.
You know, the little traumas that are normal in daily life, you're protected from them when you're in rehab. But then you have to come out, and you suddenly have to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. And I think that
Right.
is so challenging. Did you find
Well,
yourself,
and
what that is?
you're
Sorry, you.
in an environment where everybody has stuff. Everybody's just got shit going on, and you just go, okay, I'm one of you. And I think pain is the great equalizer, right?
Uh,
Where, the bottom line of addictive behavior and of trauma is that there's pain.
mm,
And it becomes so. One of my best friends it was 22, 23 and queer, and totally different religiously
mm,
and socially and age wise, and we just bonded on our pain and on our
mm,
similarities, and are still very, very good friends.
mm,
And so it really became this environment where it was comforting, because you don't assume that the other person is just looking at you like, what the hell's the
mm,
matter with her? You just
mm,
assume somebody's looking at you and go, she's here for a reason,
mm,
same as me.
mm. It's beautiful, isn't it? When you can actually own up to who you really are, warts and all. I think that is such a freedom and such an development within yourself. I I, as a doctor, I was not allowed to criticize environments in which I worked. So there's often in contracts written in, you're not allowed to speak negative about a hospital. So, and there were often lots of bad things happening, and bad things happening to me and to my patients due to
Mm-hmm.
systems. And it was, oh, I was always angry. And I could never speak out. I had a feeling. And now I was in rehab. And the moment I said the first time, hi, I'm Stefan, I'm an alcoholic, that was when the flood, when the dam broke. From
Mm-hmm.
then on, you couldn't shut me up. And it was a safe environment. I could actually be honest about my mental problems. I could also be honest about the things that had happened to me. And I could talk negative. Not negative, I
Right.
could be honest about the shit situations in which I had found myself.
Yeah.
And it was such an intoxicating, beautiful feeling, such a freedom to finally say the truth and say it out loud for what it was.
Right.
And
Do you ever crave those, that kind of environment, that kind of freedom, that openness that existed there? Do you ever crave being back there?
I'm cheating because I'm creating that environment on my show. So,
Ah.
so my show and the people that I surround me with, my guests, and inevitably my guests become sort of collaborators in the future, and we do things together. So suddenly I have got this group of friends that are from all over the world, but we are brothers and sisters because we have gone through
Mm.
so much shit together, just in different shades of shit. So therefore, it is. I actually don't miss the rehab because I can be so honest, brutally honest with you here on my show. And so I give myself the freedom. Otherwise, I would miss it absolutely. No two ways around it.
That's interesting. I never really thought of my podcast in that light, but
Mm.
it's true. We surround ourselves with people that become a community that's engaging and that is supportive, and
Mm.
yeah,
So it is,
it's
I
true.
get, right now, I had an hour of therapy with you, and I guess you had an hour of therapy with me.
Absolutely.
So it's actually one of these beautiful things. So there is, that proves that the opposite to addiction is connection. And here we are living proof that that this fact is 100% true. And
Yeah.
I wouldn't have it any other way. It is, I get
Yeah.
a kick out of every show. And I mean, regardless of, I mean, how important it is for me shows that I got up this morning at 5:45 to get ready for a show at 6, where I was the guest. But I didn't mind. I was actually looking forward to it. And normally at 5:45, for the record, no, don't even talk to me. And until I had at least a few coffees, okay? Don't talk to me. Yet this morning I was, come on, let's do it. And that was so beautiful, okay? So therefore, that shows what a beautiful environment it is when you are open, when you are transparent, because that then allows you to address some of the issues, that allows you to grow, that allows you to
Right.
transform further. Because today there were a few times when I sort of thought, in our little discussion here, and it was beautiful. You made me think. You made me reevaluate certain
Hmm.
things. You asked me questions where I thought, and it's, I love it. I love it. I've
Yeah.
grown. I've grown and made significant little steps forward today. And I wouldn't miss it
Mm.
for the world.
I
So
love that.
therefore, will I continue with my show? Hell, until I'm very old and grey and have to readjust my teeth a few times in the show. But, you know, today is the session 10,213 with Stefan Neff. I don't care, because we all have so much to give once we have
Right.
transformed. We have got so much to explore further. So yes, I always say I'm addicted to life nowadays. I'm addicted to becoming a better man, a better human being, and for that I'm excited, absolutely
Yes.
excited.
Yes.
Oh, Jill, here we are.
Absolutely.
Oh, Jill, you're a gorgeous woman. I mean,
Oh,
you've gone
thank you.
through hell and back, and here you are, and you're making now your mess a message. And how beautiful is that?
Hmm.
You're coming out here to share the darkness that you had gone through, and in turn now give hope to others. And
I hope
that's
so.
what a legacy that is, because
Hmm.
that is a true minister. That is
Mm.
a true daughter of Jesus Christ. I hope I use the right words here, but it is
Mm.
ultimately,
Yeah. Thank
uh,
you. That's beautiful.
yeah, because that is how I see actually a Christian. So maybe that makes me a Christian, but I still don't believe in him. So maybe I consider myself a tool of something out there that tries to make this world a better place. Maybe that is the power that I get from somewhere. What else would drive me to do that? It's not self-satisfaction. No, it is way beyond that. No, this is, I don't know what drives me, but it's beautiful. It's an
Yeah.
energy that I have discovered, and it is beautiful. So whatever it is, guys, and it doesn't matter if you believe in God or not. It doesn't matter. There is a higher power. I think we need to accept that. There is something bigger than us. I think that's a given. What it is, semantics. If it drives you to do good things, accept it for what it is. It's an energy form out there that wants you to improve yourself and in turn the world. I'll take it. Okay, I don't need to know the details. I'm quite happy to be guided and do good things and put smiles on people's faces. And that's exactly what you do, Jill. For that, I commend you, and for that, I'm
Thank
so
you.
grateful that you came onto my show.
Thank you
If
so much for having me. And I
absolutely.
look forward to you being on my show.
I was about to ask. Now, tell us a bit about the work that you're doing. Where can people find you?
Well, you can find me at jillreily.com. And on there, there's also the links to my podcast, which is Post Traumatic Faith, which is available on all the podcast platforms. Post Traumatic Faith is really kind of about that space where faith and hope meet hardship and challenge and trauma. And it's in that space there that we kind of find ourselves where we're struggling and just figuring stuff out and kind of defining who we are in the middle of that. And so that is what I do now. And I'm also a writer and have some personal projects going on in there. So maybe there'll be a book with my face on it someday.
And guys, look down there, look into the description of the podcast and the YouTube channel because you get all the information there. Head over to jillreily.com and just check her out. What have you got to lose, eh? So there might be some nuggets there of wisdom where you think, and who knows, maybe you find your own voice and maybe get in touch with Jill and say, hey, look, this is my story. Would you be interested? And so maybe you can make your own mess, your message. And that is powerful. So when you actually find your own voice, that is the moment that your transformation comes leaps and bounces because it's so freeing. It's wow. It's just amazing. So our journeys are gorgeous if you let them be. And guys, it doesn't matter what the past brought to you. The past, your trauma does not define you, but let your trauma be the driver that pushes you forward into a new direction, a direction that you choose, and with steps that you choose to take. And that takes you away from being a victim to being a survivor and make you become a thriver. And that's exactly what Jill is. Here she is. She lost herself for a bit, and now she is the new and improved version who goes out there and is truly taking on the world. And therefore, fantastic. So, Jill, you're a gorgeous woman. Thank you so much for coming onto my show. You humbled me and honored me.
Thank you. It's an honor for me.
Cool. And you guys out there, I believe in you. Stay strong. It's okay not to be okay. And look after yourself. Bye. Dream